I'll sort it. So, set the camera rolling. I'll sit down here.
Yeah.
If you have any questions or anything, everything's going to be edited anyway. So if you mess up, just repeat it. I'm going to get some like filler shots that I can edit the audio without it affecting the footage if anything does go wrong.
Great.
So don't be afraid.
Okay.
Right, so we're recording.
Okay.
So firstly, I just want you to give a little introduction as to who you are and what sort of job you do and what's involved in it.
Yeah, sure. I'm Andy Mills. I'm a GP here at Asheville Medical Practice in Barnsley, and I've been here since 2012. So I moved to Barnsley in 2010 and did some GP training up here, and then I've been did my final year of training at this practice, and then stayed on here as a GP ever since.
So what made you want to become a doctor in the first place?
I wanted to be a doctor since I was about 10 or 11, I think. I decided really young. I had an operation myself. I really got interested in it all, and I loved science at school and wanted to do something with that would help people. So yeah, I decided pretty early to go into medicine at that stage. So
what are your sort of opinions on the job you have? Do you think it's a good profession to be in, or do you think sometimes it can be quite a challenging thing to work in, like this sort of field?
Yeah, I think both. I think it is really good. I definitely don't regret it. I've really loved it. I've worked in the hospital and in different areas of medicine before settling into GP, and I loved lots of different parts of it. But they do all come with their challenges. In some jobs you've got very long hours and stressful situations. In other jobs it's just the variety. So as a GP you deal with 101 different problems in a day, and you just got to be ready for every different thing coming in. You've got to spot those that are serious, but also reassure those that aren't so serious, and just get that
Do you
right.
find yourself having to work quite long hours then? Do you have quite difficult shifts to do sometimes?
Well, I think so. I work as a part-time GP, so I also have other commitments as well. So I help with the little church as well, and doing some studying too. So I think a lot of my colleagues would work much longer hours than I would, because I've taken that decision to work less than full time. But having said that, the days can be long and tiring. Don't really get many breaks during a day at all. And it's an early start, and it can go on until all the work's done.
Do you think it's quite difficult to sort of be in that situation then, where you're maybe not having so many breaks? Do you think that if something were to go wrong that really tested like your patience or your emotions, or if you had to deal with something that's particularly challenging, do you think you get the sort of emotional support in terms of breaks and just breathers when you need them when you work in this sort of profession?
Yeah, I think it is a real danger with it, and I think everybody's got to work out how you handle those stresses. So for some of us, it's just helpful to go and take a few minutes to talk to one of our colleagues and get rid of some of the stress that way. Sometimes you do just need to just go and get your coffee and have a little break or a breather after something difficult. You can sometimes feel from the pressure of it that you've got to just keep going and get on with the next thing. But I think it is really important to take that time if you can, but it's not always possible.
Do you often feel like you're under pressure because of the sort of responsibilities you have in the role?
Yeah, I think you do feel the responsibilities. You've got, especially during these days, we're doing an awful lot over the phone, and I think there's, we'd all rather be seeing people face to face. You can tell a lot more from a consultation face to face. You can examine people. You can read their body language and understand a lot more that way. So over the telephone, that adds the pressure sometimes, because you're having to make these decisions without seeing somebody and just from hearing them. So I think, I do feel that at times, definitely. Yeah.
Before we go on, I'm just going to check the cameras before we finish anything off and make sure they're both definitely working. Yeah, we're all sorted.
Yeah.
Just because bigger fear that I'm going to get all the way to the end and something's going to go wrong. So if I check halfway through, then we've not missed anything, but we're both going fine. So, so now I want to talk about something, and obviously I don't want you to say anything that might compromise a patient's identity or anything. But I want to talk about some of the scenarios that you might have been, because obviously you've worked here for quite a while. Have you ever had to deal with any particularly difficult patients in terms of their behaviour towards you, if they become aggressive or anything like that? A really difficult patient, and you didn't really know how well. I'm sure you've got protocols and stuff that you've got to deal with them, but have you patients often, can they get really aggressive towards some of the doctors or anything?
Yeah, sadly that does happen. So I used to be the GP for the violent patients in Barnsley. So patients who had been kicked off the list from their own doctors for violent behaviour because they broke something or threatened a doctor or got violent in the practice. So for a couple of years I would be the doctor that would care for them. There weren't many on the list, but there were some. So they'd come in with security guards to see me, but I mean that way you felt safe because you had the security guards. Actually it's the patients that you don't know that are violent can be more stressful sometimes. So yeah, I've had patients that have threatened me because I used to live in this area as well. Then patients, someone would say the sort of thing, oh, I know where you live, that sort of thing, if they don't get the medication that they want. I've never had anybody like become physically violent with me, and outside of work it's always been fine, but you do get those threats because sadly there are a lot of people around with drug problems as well, and when they come they want drugs from you that aren't for a good medical reason. They can get pretty angry when you don't give them to them.
Do you ever feel quite demoralised then by the way people speak to you? Does it ever make you question if you want to turn up to work the next day or anything like that?
Yeah, it never makes me not want to come into work, but it does. Yeah, it is hard sometimes. And dealing with complaints can be difficult as well. Everybody makes mistakes, so sometimes they're valid complaints that people make. But there are also times when you get unnecessary complaints. So like I've had to go to coroner's court in Sheffield once over decisions I made about a patient who was dying, and they were the right decisions, and the coroner agreed with that. But to actually have to go through a whole case and be grilled in court because of these decisions that you make about how you manage somebody at the end of their life, that's pretty stressful. So those things can be quite demoralising. But I understand that sometimes families just do get upset and angry, and they'll take it out on somebody even if you haven't done anything wrong.
Do you think after you've had to deal with something particularly difficult, that when you leave the workplace, that something you might have had to deal with affects your family life or personal life in some sort of negative way?
Yeah, it does. After a hard day, I think when I go home, I'll not be full of beans and smiley and stuff. So sometimes it will affect you. There have been times when it's dwelling on your mind. It's hard to sleep sometimes because of a decision you've made or something that you're concerned about, or just somebody's story that's impacted you in some way. So it can affect you. And I think I've got a very understanding wife at home who'll listen to me when I want to talk to her about things, and that can help as well. But I think it's good that you have that support outside that you can talk to.
So has a patient's story ever touched you in an emotional way?
Yeah, I mean I think it happens all the time, to be honest. There have been times when I've held back the tears as somebody's been telling me about what they've been going through. We get people suffering from domestic abuse who are just stuck in these circumstances, and it's so painful that they don't feel like they can get out of it, or families really struggling with the difficulties with their children and just not knowing how to help them, and then there was one in particular. There was a man who had been raped by some other men in the area, and that was just really painful, just listening to him and how it affected him so much he had to leave the area and find somewhere else to live. It's quite common, I think, just listening to people, if you listen well and try and get underneath maybe that anger or whatever they're coming in with, to see why they're like that. There's often a really sad story underneath.
In terms of the coronavirus and the pandemic and things, have you found that working through the pandemic has now made things a lot more difficult compared to what things used to be? Have you struggled through the pandemic to keep up with things that might have been just simple tasks before?
Yeah, I think it's changed at every different stage in it. So at the start, it was like everybody off to battle, and we were, there was that energy about it. Everything had to change, the way that we did things. We had to learn things very quickly, how to manage COVID. We had a little tent set up just next to where we're sitting now, where I'd see people, I worked here on Tuesdays and there's 10 seeing people with COVID symptoms in the early days, and we try and try and deal with them in very different ways. So that was at the start. Now I think the challenge is there's been a big backlog of lots of people who've been waiting to see their doctors or holding on to these symptoms, not telling us about them. So the workload recently has really increased, with a lot more people phoning up to get appointments. And we're still having to do a lot over the phone at the moment, but hopefully that will change soon.
Yeah, and with the increased workload that you mentioned, do you think that the government or the public or anyone needs to do anything more to sort of help out NHS and nursing professions and things to help them get through it a bit more? Is everything being done that needs to be done to support the staff?
Yeah, I think there's always more that can be done. I think everybody's in a difficult situation. I get the government has got lots of problems in sorting out laws and decisions about COVID. The public are all struggling with their own issues in their families, in their workplaces, in their own lives. So I think it is hard for everybody all round. I think, there's maybe more understanding in the early stages from people that it was hard, and I guess now everybody's just a bit fed up with COVID, so in the public I think there's probably a bit less patience with delays and waiting times and that sort of thing, and I understand that, but that can be quite hard sometimes.
Yeah, so just to sort of round everything up, when you deal with patients, and do you ever just wish there was something that you could say to everyone, one thing that you want people to know before they enter the doors of any sort of medical practice or hospital to help life make easier for the staff, something that you want them to do or how to behave or something like that?
I think I'd really like people to remember that we're here to help people. Most of us have gone into this job because we want to use whatever we've got to help people and to support them, and I think that makes a big difference when you've got someone who trusts you and knows that you are trying to help them. We won't always have the answers. You can't always sort out everybody's problems, and there are all sorts of issues in waiting times and delays, but just for them to know that we are trying to help them, that makes a big difference, I think.